Welcome back, everybody. We're in week 12, and this week we're going to talk about contracts. Um, just up front, for those who are in my other class, you've heard this before. It is finally springtime, I believe. Knock on wood or fake wood, whatever I can find here on the deck. Um, so I'm sitting outside to do the lecture today, so you're going to hear some nature sounds and maybe some kids playing in the background and a dog bark or a car go by occasionally. I just ask for your indulgence on that because I, like you, have been cooped up inside for the last, X number of months, um, unless I was bundled up to my eyeballs in wool. And so I'm going to enjoy the outdoors. So I hope if you hear any nature sounds, I hope they're relaxing rather than distracting. So this week we're going to talk about contracts, as I said. But first, just a quick word as I've been going through and doing grading on some papers, and specifically on the case briefs. Um, let me go over just one thing that I'm finding to be a systemic issue with those case briefs. Yeah, I forgot to mention with the nature noises, you might hear the occasional woodpecker. We get pileated woodpeckers here, which can get, from what I understand, up to 18 inches in size. They're huge. The ones around here are usually a foot or more. Um, really cool to see. I don't know if you have those in Western Pennsylvania. I imagine you do. It's pretty much the same area, but you will hear them in the background as well, and they're probably sickied up in the tree, so I'm not going to go and try to quiet them down. So on the case briefs, the rule, we have the IRAC plus E for the example that I added in. And on the rule, it's generally the actual codified law or court case or reference the decision is based on. So the court is saying, based on Smith v. Jones, 1937, we understand that, people can't do certain things. And that's what we're applying to this case. Or based on the, statutes in the state of Pennsylvania, statute number, whatever, we find that in this case, so-and-so erred and, should not have filed suit, or we dismiss a summary judgment or allow a summary judgment, whatever. But it's the actual law, court case, or other reference the decision's based on. Okay? So some of you are putting the rule, well, the rule is that this is how they decided. No, that's not. That's the ruling. The rule is what they're using to make that decision. Just a quick note on these briefs. When you go into your week 14 meetings, you should have printed out copies of every brief that has been assigned to you and to others. Now, it doesn't mean you need to download and print out a brief. If 5 people in the class did a court case, you don't have to print out all 5. Find the one that you like the best, the one that helps explain your position best, and use that one. The reason I say that is because when we go into the week 14 discussions, you could try to reference back to the book and look through every single case. I'm not going to give you a case name. I'm going to give you a scenario. And so I'm going to be looking for speed on this, right? You need to be somewhat familiar with the cases we've discussed along the way, and the briefs is the easiest way to do that. So again, be familiar with the cases that, if your team did, cases by type, by assignment, you may only be responsible for certain types of cases. Be familiar with those, have the briefs printed out. I expect to see you go to your notes when I ask questions. In fact, if you don't go to your notes, it's going to look very suspect. So, and you'll time out if you try to use the book, because to try to read the cases or to remember where you saw something in a case, as we're having these discussions, I will simply move on to somebody else, and that will affect your grade on the discussion. So just a quick word on that. The rule is the court case, the law, the codified law or common law case that the court is using as their litmus test to make their decision. And then you should have these case briefs printed out, one of each case brief, and your lecture notes from those that didn't involve briefs, so that you can do your best in week 14. It's worth 15 points of a possible 100. If you don't score any points in there, you're already sitting at a B. And unless you have perfect quiz scores and everything else so far, it could get ugly if you don't do at least reasonably well in that week 14 meeting. So on to contracts. Contracts are probably one of the most misunderstood and most used parts of law. A lot of things that you do in the course of a day, would be considered to be legally binding contracts. And security managers in particular use them for some pretty big ticket items, and that's both Homeland and corporate security managers. Think guard services, which both Homeland and corporate uses more of, because normally Homeland will use some sort of federal agency, but not always. Oftentimes you will find contract security officers at federal buildings. Intel sources, you don't always use internal government intel sources. You will use intel source services. Electronic security integration and monitoring, whether you are in a corporate building or a federal building, if you have an access control system, if you have cameras, if you have any physical security systems, then you will have outside contractors to put those in normally. In the corporate world, you may use private investigators and background check services. Both sides of the house have repairs and maintenance on all kinds of things. They all need contracts to be provided, and at some point in your career, you will be involved in some form of contract negotiation and contract settlement. So even if you don't use it in your work, you will certainly use it in your personal life, and understanding the basis of contracts is something that it's a skill that we all should have. So what exactly is a contract? Very simply, contracts are oral or written obligations between two or more parties. That's it. They're usually formal, right? You think of a contract, you're going to a contract signing, right? Everybody has to sign, and it has to be notarized, and it has to be properly dated, and you need potentially witnesses. But really, to form a contract, you need none of those things. A written note between parties, right? Be it signed or not signed, may constitute a contract. A series of emails or texts may do that. Conversations between parties. If I ask you to, paint my house and you say okay, and I offer you a certain amount of money to do so, we have a contract, be it written or otherwise. A voicemail could be considered a contract. I call and leave a voicemail for a supplier that I have now and tell them I need an additional, number of days of service, and I'm assuming this is the price, and I need them to provide it right away because I have an emergency. I have created a contract. And in fact, even clicking the I agree button on certain websites, in fact, any website that says click here to agree, if you don't agree, you don't get the service, you have formed a contract. And in fact, those contracts can be quite complex and definitely limit your rights as the end user. Contracts are quite simple. There's an offer, an acceptance of the offer, and consideration. Those are the three parts of a contract those are the three things that make up a contract, right? An offer. So here's an example. I'm going to provide landscape services for your home for $1,500 for the month of May, June, July, and August. And I want full payment up front. And you agree to that, and the time frame of the services, and you pay me $1,500, we have a contract. Now, anyone who spends $1,500 on lawn service, knowing the number of lawn service companies that are out there, knowing that there are very good ones and there are very fly-by-night ones, anybody really with a lawnmower and a gift of gab can set up a landscape service and say, I will provide this service. Normally, you would get such a thing in writing, so that if it goes wrong, you have some sort of legal grounds to go back. But oftentimes these are done verbally, and all that has to happen is there's an offer. I offered to provide the service, you accepted that offer, and you paid me consideration, and we now have a contract. It's that simple. So let's look at a different example. So I'm in my home, and this actually happened to me one time. A water pipe burst in the basement, and water was rising very rapidly. Truth of the matter is, we had just moved into our home. I was away on a business trip. My wife called me. She went downstairs and splashed down. And there was about 3 inches of water in the downstairs of the house. My upstairs and downstairs are, as usual, about the same size. The house is just under 4,000 square feet. That is an awful lot of water. And she called a company to come that did both plumbing and restorative work, and called them on the phone and said, I need you to get over here right now. The water is still flowing. I don't know where from, because she really couldn't get to anything. Obviously, the water is going now, and it's getting close to electric outlets, so we don't want to be splashing around down there. And so she called. The company responds. So I made an offer. come to my house to do this work. That was an offer. They responded to the home. That was acceptance of the offer. The consideration, however, we had not talked about. I mean, it's very rare that in an instance like that, you will take the time on either side to say, okay, but it's going to be X amount per hour, and I'll give you an estimate while the water is still running. We didn't talk charges, but conventional wisdom says that if I'm calling a service to provide something to me, that payment is expected. It would be unreasonable for me to think that Joe's Plumbing would show up, send someone in, shut the water off, take a big truck, suck the water out of my home, try to pick up as many of my valuables as possible that were still sitting in boxes from when we moved in, because we'd only been in the house for about a week and a half, to try to salvage as much as possible, and then for me to think that they were going to do that for free. Now, there certainly could be some argument over that, and as quick as possible, a written contract should be executed, but we had a contract. I called, they accepted, and consideration was through conventional wisdom, the normal process of engaging a business to do a service. Now, what we're going to find out, however, is in those situations, those are normally where problems arise because there's not a clear understanding on consideration nor scope of what the project is going to do. And then we have a particular case I want to talk about this week where the agreement involved brothers on a verbal contract. And that is why verbal contracts, as people say, are not worth the paper they're not written on. So let's take a look at a couple of examples and parts of a contract. So what about oral contracts? Are oral contracts legal? Oral or verbal contracts are valid and enforceable. No matter what anybody tells you, when you make a promise, it can be enforced as an oral contract, as long as there are the three parts: the offer, the acceptance, and the consideration. What becomes at issue is really what was agreed to. And the courts have found that it's very hard to prove an oral contract, but when in doing so, the proof has to be so cogent, clear, and forcible as to leave no reasonable doubt as to its terms and character. So in other words, the oral agreement, the oral contract, needs to be extremely clear. There needs to be some other circumstance that we can use to look at to show that the agreement made sense and that it was indeed in force and that it simply wasn't written. In the case that I gave, Joe's Plumbing responded to provide a service. That's their specialty on my request. Clearly, I entered into a contractual agreement with them for some level of service. Now, the level of service, whether I wanted them to remove all the water from the basement, whether I wanted them to try to salvage, whether I wanted to bring in big super fans to dry things out, whether I wanted them to rip out the carpet and replace the flooring and all those things is a different story. What was contracted for is a little bit ambiguous. However, I called them and made an offer. They accepted that offer by responding, and certainly by conventional wisdom of a business arrangement, there is consideration was guaranteed. So that oral contract then was good. It is certainly so cogent, clear, and forcible as to leave no reasonable doubt as to its terms and character. Right? The basic terms are you show up and I will pay you. However, again, the argument comes in when we talk about scope, what was actually supposed to be done and what was supposed to be charged. That is why most states have adopted what's called a statute of frauds. They are on the state-by-state basis, but in all 50 states, they are so similar that they could easily become a single reference. The statute of frauds protects complex business transactions by mandating some things must go in writing. And really, the two functions of the statute of frauds are the cautionary function, which basically tells us that when you're going to sit down and put something in writing, you think more about it, you take it more seriously, and you're less hasty about just getting things done. If indeed you are forced to write up a contract, you have the time and the detail to have second thoughts, or to say, oh, we forgot about this, we forgot about that. Where in an oral contract, it can be done so quickly, it's a conversation. Second is the evidentiary function. With a written contract, you prevent people from going into court when there's a dispute on the contract and simply lying. You know, I could go and say, well, yes, I called Joe's Plumbing, but I expected them to come out and shut off the water, and that was it. I didn't ask them to start taking the water out of the basement or to move my things or do any other work. And that can be argued. That is something that, a court may take up, right? But if I have a written contract, it would specify the things that need to be done. That gives you the evidentiary function. I can't come in and say, well, that's all I wanted to do, because I would have signed a contract that said these are the things you're going to do. So the two functions of statute of frauds are the cautionary function and the evidentiary function. Cautionary, again, gives you time to think about what you're doing. Evidentiary gives us something that we can hang our hat on if there is a dispute, so we can use it as a reference. The statute of frauds in almost all states require a written contract for these items. Contracts involving the sale of an interest in land. We know that we would not buy a piece of land without some kind of contract and some kind of deed. And if you've ever purchased a home, if you haven't, talked to your parents, your grandparents, or someone you know that has purchased a home. My wife and daughter are both realtors. They spend more of their time going over paperwork and contracts than they do actually going out finding things to sell and selling them. Very complex contractual agreements when you are buying land. Contracts, the performance of which extend beyond 1 year. And the idea is that if it's going to take a full year for you to complete this contract, right? A contract to build something, a contract to provide something. If it's going to be over a full year, the idea is that that is complex enough and impactful enough that you should get it in writing. Contracts in which someone assumes responsibility for someone else's debt. Certainly, if you ask me to co-sign for you on a loan and I agree to do that, you and the bank are definitely want to get that in writing, and so am I. So I understand under what circumstances I may be responsible for your debts. But certainly when you assume the debt of someone else, you want to get that in writing. Promises for the consideration for which is getting married essentially is twofold there. A contract could be the consideration for getting married, could be a prenuptial agreement, and it could also be the marriage license itself, right? You must indeed enter into the contract of marriage on a written form in all states. Contracts for the sale of goods worth more than $500. That in of itself sounds pretty basic, but how do you break down goods? How do you put a price on some things? The courts have had trouble with that, and we'll talk about how the courts have watered down statute of frauds in a minute. And then certain promises by executors and administrators, wills and trusts. It's very hard for you to go into a court and say, but my dad promised me the house, not my brothers and sisters. If there is no written will or trust, then that contract will certainly be disputed, and that is why the statute of frauds say that things like wills and trusts, promises by executors and administrators must be in writing. So there certainly are exceptions to statute of frauds, and over the years, this stems from 1600s English law. I think it was 1677 Act of Parliament, which established the first statute of frauds in the UK, or in England at the time. And the courts have watered down the statutes to some extent, and that is what case law does. It takes away some of the strictness sometimes and looks for the exceptions. One of the exceptions is the concept of past performance. If both parties take some form of action on a contract, then neither really has the right to come back and say, but it should have been in writing. Right? Once you take an action on it, you have accepted the fact that this is an oral contract, and part performance does that. So if and in fact, I'll hold and we'll talk about part performance when we talk about a particular case in Iowa coming up. Improvement of land or property. So the transfer of land, as we saw, has to be in writing. But let's just say that I tell you, I will allow you to buy this house for me, and we don't need a deed or anything. You pay me, and everything's good, and we say, okay, that's great. Then I come back as the person later on and say, no, I didn't agree to buy this at all. But if I've improved the property, if I moved in the house and I painted and I redecorated and I started upkeep on the property, then I have made improvements on that land or property. I have then essentially told the court that I agreed to the oral contract. If I had no intentions of agreeing to an oral contract, why would I have painted the house, right? Delivery and use of portions of goods, and that will be the subject of the case we're going to talk about in a minute. When someone delivers something to you and you didn't order it, you have to give them notice that they've made a wrongful delivery. Now, in some jurisdictions and in some ways, when you didn't order something and it comes by mail, you actually can keep that thing, right? But if someone were to pull up and with a load of furniture in front of your house, very expensive high-end antique furniture that you didn't order, and you open the door and you let them unload it and you sat down on the furniture, you have allowed the delivery and use of a portion of the goods. The whole thing of, well, look, I have no liability here because there was no written contract. I don't have to pay for this. I get to keep it, is null and void. You've used the goods. Specialty or customs goods are exempt from the statute of frauds, and the reason is that they are made specifically for someone. They are often done orally. I need you to make a custom part for me for, I want a new grill for my truck and I want it to be custom. I want my name across the front of it because I'm like that, right? Because I'm so important and I want people to know who I am. And I ask you to make that, and then I say, no, I'm not paying for that. I don't want it. The statute of frauds, if you could come back and say, well, it was over $500. There was no written contract. You have no standing. That is not true because it is a custom good that an oral contract was made on. Those become very sticky because, indeed, I could say I never even asked to have that made. And service contracts oftentimes are exempt from the statute of frauds simply by expediency. If indeed in the security world I have an incident at a site where I don't have armed guards and I want to call a supplier of armed guards, let's just say the guard company I use does not provide armed people, and that there's a number of guard companies that don't do that anymore. They simply don't provide armed officers. So I need armed, trained officers. I call another one and I say, I need 2 people armed at that facility immediately. That's a service contract, and it's certainly going to be more than $500 just to get them over there. The average hourly rate on an armed guard is somewhere around $45 an hour bill rate. It's not what they make, that's what you pay. And it's certainly, if I'm going to bring 2 of them over there, that's $90 an hour. If they're going to be there for a full day, there's $720 right there. We're over $500, but I don't necessarily need a written contract to ask for that, and the company doesn't need a written contract to prove that I asked for it. If indeed I did it through an email or a voice message or just a phone call, that oral contract would stand up and it is exempt from the statute of frauds, even though it is for goods and services over $500. So Gravit v. Gravit is a case in Iowa from 2015, involves brothers. I called the brothers B1 and B2, brother 1 and brother 2, for simplicity's sake, so we wouldn't mix up one Gravit from the other. But the brothers made a verbal agreement that B1 would provide 400 bales of hay to B2 for $65 a bale. Both of them are farmers, as we find many in Iowa, and B2 is actually a farm director, farm manager for someone, and he asked his brother for 400 bales of hay at $65 a bale. B1, the other brother, says, fine, I will do that. B1 delivers 400 bales of hay, and B2 has tenant cattle on his land, and they ate almost all of it over the course of time, right? Not in one day, but the 400 bales of hay were just about depleted. Now, B2 came back and claimed he only contracted for 200 bales, and he's only going to pay $13,000 for the 200 he asked for, not the additional $13,000 for the ones he didn't. And brother 1 sues brother 2 for breach of contract, saying, no, you asked for 400. B2 contends, by the way, that B1 is an alcoholic with a poor memory, which adds a little bit of flair to this particular boring case. But essentially, there's a dispute on an oral contract as to how many bales of hay were contracted for. So what's at issue here? Was a verbal contract entered into for 400 bales of hay at $65 per bale by B1 and B2? Is that contract enforceable? Is the evidence of fitness, the alcoholism, enough to negate a contract? And does the $500 statute of fraud stipulation come into play? So the court decided that indeed a contract was entered into, that verbal contract was pretty clear, and in fact, B1 brought in evidence that B2's farm manager, someone who worked for him, was told by B2 to expect 400 bales of hay. So B2 made the oral agreement with his brother for 400 bales, went back to the farm, told the guys at the farm, hey, I just got 400 bales of hay for my brother at $65 a bale. So he had evidence that indeed the brother B2 had told others about their agreement, and the court found that indeed that was an oral agreement and an oral contract that was enforceable. The fitness might be enough in some contracts, right? A contract has to be made with a person who is of legal age to enter into contracts, which is generally 18 years of age in most states, with the exception of marriage, which may be 16 in some states, but normally 18. It has to be a person that is reasonably able mentally to enter into a contract, right? So you have to prove pretty extreme vulnerability, right? You take advantage of somebody by entering into a contract with someone whose mental capacity is less than that of, the standard 18-year-old, right? Regardless of their age. That, in many cases, could overturn a contract. But in this case, there wasn't enough evidence to show that even if the brother was indeed an alcoholic with a bad memory, that his memory failed him in this case, because the farm manager was able to support the idea that 400 bales were indeed contracted for. Now, the $500 statute of fraud stipulation did not come into play only because B2 didn't ask for it. He went into court and used the alcoholism as a way to try to negate the contract. He could have very well said that the contract was null and void because it was not in writing, and indeed it was more than $500. The court is not going to enforce the statute of frauds for you. You must bring that in as your defense when there's a reason you didn't abide by a contract, and they didn't do it for him. So it may have very well been that he could have found a way to say, I'm not paying for these bales of hay. The award was made to B1 for the additional $13,000. Now, this is where part performance comes into play, and I think it's a pretty good example. 200 bales were contracted for according to B2, 400 according to B1. If only 200 bales of hay were contracted for, why did B2 allow his tenant cattle to have access to and to eat almost 400 bales? It is indeed part performance. B2, even if the agreement, the original conversation was 200 bales, even if B1, his alcoholism was a problem, his bad memory was a problem, and he got it wrong and delivered 400, if B2 had only used 200 and then said, no, come get the other 200, I didn't want those, I didn't contract for them, he would have potentially been able to win his case. But part performance, he in part used the disputed goods himself. They're not custom goods, but he used them. Indeed, made it so that his contract for 400 bales was found valid by the court. So in this case, we have part performance, where someone used the goods, even though they said they didn't want them, didn't ask for them, they used them, and therefore they added to the problem, right? Just like improving property. We have a case where the $500 statute of frauds limit, right, should have been asked for, and it may have been a question for the court, but the B2, the defendant, didn't ask for it to be considered. Therefore, the court is not going to bring it up. It is something that you must bring up in a tort. And the award was made for the full 400 bales, which sounds like a reasonable decision and a correct decision by this Iowa court. So when you're contracting for hay with your brother, you've got a written contract. It may be very simple. It may be a couple of sentences. B1 will deliver 400 bales of hay in this size, right? To make sure we don't say a bale is something, a bale is not a standard size, I don't believe, by law. Although a bale of hay is a bale of hay is a bale of hay when you buy them. I don't believe that there's a stipulation as to what, it's, I think, 2 by 4 by 3 or something, I don't know, or 2 by 2 by 4. But you'd probably want to say the size or weight of the bales, and the amount paid, and when they would be delivered. And that would be it. You could do that in a few sentences on a piece of paper, and both of them initial, sign it, whatever, and it's agreed to, and there's no argument. But in a written business contract, there are certain parts of the contract that you want to have in every contract to protect you. So they start with jurisdiction, and jurisdiction tells us where disputes will be settled. If you and I enter into an agreement for me to provide something to you, and things go wrong, we could go to court in Pennsylvania, if that's where you live. But some of you, I think, in this class live in New York. You could take it to court in New York. If it's between you and I could take it to court in Michigan. Jurisdiction is something that keeps everybody honest about their vulnerability when it comes to disputing a contract. If I have a contract with, let's say, Oracle, right? And I've agreed to buy software from Oracle, and we sign a contract together, it is likely that Oracle would put in there that any disputes would be settled in the state of Washington, because that's where Oracle is. I may be in the state of Michigan, and if I want to file a suit because I believe that they didn't sell me the software I needed, and it's a small claim, I would still need to file that claim in Washington if the jurisdiction was set in my contract. If it's not set, then you can do it in either state. And most of the time when you sign a contract, you want jurisdiction assigned so that everybody knows where they need to go. You want notice set, and notice really just tells you how to contact someone and who to contact in case there is a change or dispute. People change. So we enter into a contract with Oracle, and it says if there's a problem with the contract, call Bob Jones. Well, Bob Jones hits the lottery tomorrow. He's not going to work at Oracle. He's going to lay on the beach somewhere. So instead, we say you contact the legal department at Oracle at this address and this email, right? So that we know who to contact in case of a change or dispute. There needs to be some language about assignment or severability. Oftentimes, companies change hands. So if a company, I have a contract with Comcast to provide my internet and my cable TV. And they also provide home security systems. And let's say I sign a contract with Comcast for a home security system, and then they decide to sell off that part of the business to someone else. Does my contract go with them? If there's a contract that says that I allow assignment, then yes, indeed. If they sell that part of their business to ADT because they find that it doesn't fit their core business, and they want to spin that off, and that happens a lot, and I've agreed to assignment, then I would then have to make my checks out to ADT every month. If I don't allow assignment, then when Comcast gets out of that business, they need to notify me, and I'm no longer covered by that contract, and I can go out and find a new provider. The same is true when it comes to severability. Normally in a service contract, there is stipulation that the parties may sever the contract on mutual agreement. So if I sign a 3-year agreement with a company, I may say that either party may give the other 60 days notice, and we can sever the contract. Normally severability, however, is done so that it favors the person who writes the contract. So for instance, in my guard contracts, there is severability, and it says that I may sever the contract with the guard provider with 30 days written notice. The guard company may sever the contract with me with 180 days written notice. The reason being is it's going to take me longer to find a new provider, retrain guards, and put them in place than it is for them to pull them out. But I always write the contract to my favor, and I have not been pushed back. The guard companies understand that if they want to charge me, that they have to accept that as one of the stipulations, that I get longer for severability than they get. Non-compete agreements stipulate whether a contractor can work for competitors. This is normally an employment thing. But let's say, we'll stick with the security industry. Those guards, if they have a non-compete agreement, if there's a non-compete agreement in a contract I sign with a guard company, it may say that I can't use those guards under another provider for 1 year from the time I sever the contract. This is to protect the contractor from me just going out and finding somebody else, stealing all their people, and leaving them on the job and paying somebody else for the services. Non-compete agreements in the security industry are something you need to watch out for. There are some guard companies that make guards sign non-compete agreements saying that you agree not to go to work for a competitor at any place we assign you for a period of 1 year, and if they lose the contract, you have to move on to someplace else. You can't take a job. It's a bit of a legal fight now in many places, whether or not that's even legal to do for jobs that are considered to be lower skill levels. But watch for non-compete agreements, and in fact, in a written business agreement, you should say that there are no non-competes if indeed you don't want any. Now, the scope is what's very specifically called for in the contract. What does this contract do? Does it sell me something? Does it provide a service? And you have to be very detailed in your scope. This is what you are contracting to have done or you're contracting to do, right? So very specifically, a scope or a statement of work is an important part of a written business contract. And you can't just say, I want you to build me some stairs. I'm going to contract for you to build stairs at the front of my house. If I just say that, then those stairs could go from the ground up to the second story instead of onto the first story. Those stairs could be a spiral staircase that goes up, comes back down, and it looks like something like the old mousetrap game. Those stairs could be built out of toothpicks or marshmallows. You really need to stipulate in the scope very specifically what you want built, what codes it must conform to, what materials must be used, what inspections must be done, whether permits are included, whether or not there's disposal of anything or some other expectations of performance, right? Key performance indicators, things that a company must do to show that they're complying with the contract. Those things all go into a scope. That's the most specific part of a contract. The next part, obviously, is compensation or consideration, as we know, as part of a contract. It tells who pays who. When's the payment due? What form is accepted? And where's the payment made? Can you imagine having a contract with someone and they contract with you to plow their snow? You have a snowplow business. And you're going to plow their snow out of their driveway all winter for the sum of $1,000. And you agree to that, and you say, no, you pay me at the end of the winter because I offer a rebate if we don't get X number of inches of snow. That's one of your marketing strategies. And the end of the winter comes and they don't pay you. If you don't have a timeline that payment is due at a certain time, then what is a reasonable time for payment to be due? The person who had the snow plowed could say, yes, but it's only April. Historically, the state of Michigan or the state of Pennsylvania, the state of Western Pennsylvania, gets snow in May. It's happened before. There's been snow in June in the state of Michigan. In fact, there are places in our state where year-round there is snow at least lying under trees somewhere because you have the UP to consider. But unless you have a timeline as to when payment is due, what form of payment is accepted, and where payment is made, those all can become points of contention later on in a contract. Now, in more modern contracts today, and even in simple ones, there should be a statement that determines the ownership of work products. I had someone come in last summer, build 2 decks on my home, upper and a lower deck, stacked decks on the wooded side of the house. It's where I'm making my lecture today because it's a great place to sit. The design of which, is unique because it was custom designed, if you will, certainly because it's sitting on, a custom piece of property. It had to be built in a certain way. There's a slight slope, so we had to use different sized timbers. I wanted certain railings, all those things. I could have stipulated that the work product, the design, became mine, and I owned the design of this deck. Now, that is very unusual when you have something built for your home that you would do that. But you want to be able to, if the builder wants to go and say, I already designed that exact same deck and it would fit on this other house and these people want a deck and I'm going to use that same drawing and same design, not have to do it again, that saves them time and energy and money. They would own the intellectual property to that deck. Now, in modern contracts, we're often talking about information and intellectual property. So you want to determine who owns what in the end. That can be a simple statement. The contractor owns any work product and design, or the homeowner owns any work product and design, or work products become the property of the homeowner and any design features and non-tangibles become the property of the contractor. And then finally, you want to mention dispute resolution. How are disputes handled? When you point and click on any website, in there somewhere is going to be a statement on alternative dispute resolution. I'm sure some of you are familiar with ADR, but it's a neutral arbitrator will sit down. Rather than take someone to court when there's a problem, you agree ahead of time that you will go to a neutral arbitrator and you will hear what they say and you will accept their decision and you won't go to court. Now, people who are skilled in ADR and run ADR shops will tell you it's cheaper than court, and people who, lawyers will tell you really it isn't because it takes so long and they charge so much. Oftentimes you can get things done without going to court, but an arbiter will always come and have a sit-down meeting. Either way, when you point and click, you're almost always agreeing to alternative dispute resolution. So when you point and click and you agree on that piece of software, let's say it's Excel. Excel is used by a lot of people to do financials. And let's just say that Microsoft, who wrote Excel, made a major flaw in their formulas. And in fact, when you do a very complex spreadsheet with more than 500 entries, financial entries, it automatically drops off the last 2 entries. And the last 2 entries in a very complex spreadsheet you did for, let's say, the hospital you work for, and all of the expenditures came out with a bottom line that was $1 million off. When you downloaded that software, you clicked and you agreed to terms and conditions. And normally it would be that you would go to an alternative dispute resolution with Microsoft rather than taking them to court for $1 million. And an alternative dispute arbitrator may find that you indeed are entitled to some restitution, but you've already agreed that you won't sue these companies. So the point and click is probably the biggest thing on dispute resolution, but in every business contract, there should be a method that you design as to how disputes will be handled. You know where they're going to be handled, what state, because you've done that in jurisdiction. Now, how will they be handled? Is it litigation in court, or is it through alternative dispute resolution? Now, because many of you are corporate security majors or homeland security majors, I'd like to talk just a little bit about security guard contracts specifically. Although I am a firm believer in contracting out security guard services because you do shift liability considerably, you can't shift it 100%. You can dilute your liability, but security guard contracts are common because it's not normally the core business of where the services are provided. If you're running a hospital, your core business is making people feel better. It's not security, but you're going to have security guards normally at a hospital. So you normally contract it out. It's not your core business. And you are moving some of the liability, the training, the functions of buying uniforms and all those things to somebody else who does that for a living, and you don't have to dedicate people to do that. You're diluting the liability to some extent. It hasn't gone away. However, there is a deep pockets rule. Okay. Normally, when someone is hurt through a security guard, and it's a contracted security guard, they will not sue the security guard company. They will sue the entity where the injury took place. We saw that in the nightclub case that we read last week. But it's very common in the security industry. If in my particular case at Pfizer, I use several different guard companies. And if one of the officers does something and injures someone, it is unlikely that the guard company is going to get sued. I will get sued first. Aggrieved parties rarely distinguish between contract and proprietary security officers. It's just they were security at Pfizer in my case. And the deep pockets rule really is that they look and see which entity do they think has the deepest pockets. They're normally wrong, by the way. But they look and they say, who can I sue? Is it Pfizer or is it the guard company? I think people make the mistake of not knowing that guard companies are huge multinational corporations, many of them. There's certainly some mom and pop shops out there, quite a few of them. But G4S, Securitas, Allied Universal, several more, Garda World, several more companies out there have upwards of 200,000 employees and revenues in the tens of billions of dollars. They are very large companies. But the deep pockets rule says that the lawsuit, when it comes to a contract, is going to go not necessarily against the contractor, but against the home location where the injury or harm took place. So if you know that, then you want to make sure that you have a very solid contract with your security guard company so that even if you are sued, you can have them named as a co-defendant and indeed shift that liability over to actions they did or did not take that may have caused the injury. But there are some very common errors in security guard contracts, and they are so prevalent that it was easy to list them. So many people will contract for security guards, and the guard company will send someone in with their standard boilerplate contract and say, okay, let's sign and date this thing here. That always emphasizes the advantages to the security company, and there are all kinds of liability limits in those, and you will read one of them in the case in your reading this week. Or there's no contract at all. It's just a purchase order. I write a purchase order to someone, which is indeed a form of contract, to say, provide me with guard service 168 hours a week. That's one guard, 24 hours a day. And for the enumeration of $175,000 a year. And I am the person to contact. And then there's some boilerplate language on a purchase order that doesn't really protect you in this specific type of contract. So there's no contract at all. When there's no contract at all, there's generally no proof of liability insurance. $1 million to $2 million is standard liability insurance for a security guard company because they take on risk because of their enforcement responsibilities. There's generally no proof of competency or licensure, right? So you're asking for security guards and you just say, provide me X number. You're concerned about price and the number of hours and making sure that they, are wearing the right uniform. You never do ask, do any of these people have a high school education? Can they read and write? The list of qualifications in the scope for a security guard contract has to include training, uniforms, equipment, agency supervision. What do I provide and what do you provide? If you don't do that, you will find that when you go to put somebody in a patrol vehicle, there isn't one because you never did stipulate who was going to provide the vehicle. You never did stipulate that that vehicle needs to be safe and operable and have no mechanical failures, right? Or needs to be replaced if it does. And those are very common. Contract expectations should be provided when you're asking for the price. So the scope of a contract, the things that you're going to ask for, the things that are mandatory, all of those major parts of a contract should be things that you send to anyone when you ask them to give you a price. And generally speaking, in security guard contracting and other security services contracting, quite frankly, we tend to go out and find a contractor and then start to write up what we want them to do. And it always backfires. So writing out the contract and writing out the scope first and using it as a negotiation tool is the smart way to go. So in this week's assignment, you're going to write a contract, and we'll go into that in a minute, but scope is the thing where I really want you to concentrate. Yes, you're going to have to use all of the elements, all of the sections of a contract that I stipulated, but those are like 1 or 2 sentences. The scope, on the other hand, is something a little differently. You're going to be exact about the tasks you want to be executed. You're going to talk about time frames. When do you need to do it? The qualification of the workers and the quality and safety of equipment. Key performance indicators. What are you going to look for as far as quality when the job's done in order to say, okay, it's done, right? In our case, we're going to build some stairs, as I mentioned before, on a house. We're going to replace some steps. Is it enough for you to go out and just step on them and say, okay, that feels solid, we're good, and pay the person? Or are you going to test to make sure they use the right kind of wood, or that they're painted if you wanted them painted, or that they are, up to code? What is your key performance indicator? What are you going to use under mutual agreement with somebody to say that the job is done? You're going to want to have in the scope your ability to reject workers without cause. If indeed someone comes to work on your home, and I actually had this happen to me, someone showed up to work on my home, and it was an elevated area, not high off the ground, probably about 6 feet off the ground, but there was the distinct odor of an alcoholic beverage emitting from their person, as they say in criminology. And I had the right in my contract to reject that worker, to call the owner and say, I don't want this person working on my property. When they said why, I said, well, that's for you to figure out, because I just have the open ability to reject a worker without cause, and that is what I'm going to do. If indeed I was wrong, smelled alcohol in the wrong person, and I rejected them, they could sue me for defamation, right? Potentially. I published something by talking with their boss. In this case, I had a contract without cause, and that is what it chose to do. And then you want to have stipulations on workplace conduct, safety, security, and usability, right? If someone is working on the stairs of your home, how are you going to get in and out? How long can they keep it for? When they're done in day one, where they may have poured footings, but there's no safe stairs, what do you expect them to do? Do they block it off? Do they tape it off? Do they put up signage? How about workplace conduct? If you live in the city and they're working on your front steps, and every time somebody goes by of the opposite gender, they decide they're going to make, whistle and make catcalls. Is that acceptable on your property? I would find that to be unacceptable. It would make for bad neighbors, right? For bad relationships with my neighbors. So I would consider that workplace conduct to be unacceptable. Those are the types of things that you need to put into scope. So when you write your scope for this week, think about those things and other things. Think about the stairs made out of marshmallows, right? What are you going to do to make sure that there are as few loopholes as possible in as little language as possible to make sure you get the end result you want with the least amount of disruption? So for this week, you're going to read the text, pages 388 to 394. It is a contract case. I find it to be a very interesting one, especially when it comes to the limits of liability. You just finished the lecture. Thank you very much. You're going to write a very basic contract. You're going to use the parts of the contract from the lecture. You're going to do all the parts, but anything other than the scope can be done in just a couple of sentences. The jurisdiction is going to be Pennsylvania, probably. How are you going to handle disputes? Well, ADR normally requires a contract. If it's for something at your home, it would probably be in the courts of Butler County or wherever, right? Through litigation, right? That's how you're going to handle disputes. But you may say before litigation that you require a meeting with the contractor to attempt to reach agreement. A face-to-face meeting. You could say that. It would save you time and energy, perhaps. But what I want you to do is really pay particular attention to the scope, because that is the meat of almost any contract. And as you go through and write and read contracts in your future, that's where you're going to spend most of your time, because that is where things go horribly wrong. You're going to write that contract. Okay, shouldn't take much time to do that, especially the other parts, but the scope, spend some time on. And then you're going to, in 2 separate responses to classmates, you're going to read their contract and then give them a scenario based on the contract that they've agreed to, that they wrote, how you, if you were an unscrupulous contractor or an inept one or an unqualified one, how that project might look in the end. So again, in my example, I hope everybody's going to put down what materials they want their steps made out of in this exercise, in this contract. Because if not, I will tell you that, okay, I've created the steps perfect and they are made out of matchsticks and marshmallows. And that is probably not what you want. So I want you to look at 2 other classmates and then tell them, okay, I was your builder, I was unscrupulous, and I did this, and I still met your contract. It is not meant to call attention to somebody's good or bad work. It's to call attention to the fact that the scope has to be so detailed in some cases, and you want your contract to be as tight as possible, that even when you do that, and I know that you will diligently do that originally, that you could run into issues. Okay, just a quick word before we sign out here. Week 14, you should have your cases and lecture slides organized. If you try to work without those, like I said, you're not going to like the results. You're going to time out, and we're going to keep those meetings moving. So I'll expect you to, work fast and be organized as much as possible. I will give you some time, don't worry, but you're not going to be able to try to read cases from the book that you haven't read before. Dr. Lubinsky's been invited to our meetings. She was pretty excited about those and the ones from the physical security course that are coming up. I know she can't attend all of them. That would be 12 hours of work, but expect that she may pop into one or more of our meetings. Also remember that her doctorate is in law. So, she may certainly be able to add to the conversation. But she found it to be quite interesting that we're taking this tact of using the cases we've discussed and applying them to scenarios. She thought that was a pretty cool thing, and she wanted to come in and at least sit in on at least one of those. So one of the groups at least will see Dr. Lubinsky. And then in week 14, I will give you the parameters for your writing for week 15, which is your final paper. Many of you have done a reflection paper for me before, but you also understand you can't do it ahead of time because there's always a twist on what I want in the paper. But in week 14, I will tell you what you'll have to do to turn in at the end of finals week. So since it's about a 3-page paper with some references, so it'll be 3 written pages, and then you'll need probably 3 to 4 references. It'll be APA format. If you're not familiar with that, don't panic, but you should be at this point in your academic career somewhat familiar with it. But I will expect APA format, and that will be a small part of the grade. But it'll be about 3 pages of writing. So just wanted to throw that at you for your time and planning. With that, if you have questions during the week, I will be popping in and looking at your contracts as you post them, and then I will be, trying to poke holes in them as well. let's have some fun with this, because I think that in the end you're going to see just how sometimes contracts, if you don't think about every little thing, you could leave yourself with some vulnerabilities, and that's the whole idea. With that, have a great week, and I'll see you on campus.